And now, I'm honored to invite for a one-on-one interview Member of Knesset Avigdor Lieberman, Chairperson of Yisrael Beiteinu, Minister of Finance, and former Minister of Finance and Minister of Defense. The interview will be carried out by the journalist Shimon Shiffer, a political commentator in Yedioth Ahronoth. Hello, everyone, and hello to Mr. Lieberman. Hello, everyone. Former Minister of Defense, former Minister of Foreign Affairs, member of Knesset for many a year. And because there aren't any journalists here, I'd like to say that I truly appreciate him very, very much. There's not a day that goes by in Israel which is a boring day. And Mr. Lieberman, you come here on a very interesting day as well. The Knesset plenary discusses the approval of the state budget, which will, of course, be passed. But you also come here after the Bank of Israel has raised for the 10th time the interest rate. Your response? Bank of Israel had no other choice. Instead of cutting back on expenditure, the government is only expanding its expenditure. The revenues go down and the expenditure goes up, and that creates inflationary pressure of the greatest weight. The current budget, 484 billion shekels, is 32 million shekels bigger than the previous budget of 2022, and of course the revenues go down. And you increase the expenditure, you simply fall by revenues, and there's no other way but to raise the interest rate in order to stop inflation one way or another. The budget is made up in such a way, it's as if you take the fuel and you pour it into the fire in order to intensify inflation, because the various articles that were added are articles that are truly merely an expenditure. These are negative incentives for going out to work. As soon as you multiply the budget of yeshivas and you raise by 50% the benefits of yeshiva students, you give out checks for billion shekels, and you create, discounts on public transport. Why work? Today we learned that against the backdrop of the ostensible crisis, and Agudat Yisrael wanted not to support the budget, a solution was made, and they will get the money. Look, the solution, at least the way it seems in the media, is totally illegal. Unlike the budget law, the budget is anchored by law. They told Goldknopf that we will give you financing from the surplus of 2023 budget. According to the law of budget, any surplus cannot be used as a budgetary source, and all the surpluses should go back to the state coffers to finance the debts of the State of Israel. Hence, this entire arrangement is illegal. I asked the chairperson of our faction of that forum to send a letter to the Attorney General and also the legal advisor of the Knesset and the Ministry of Finance, and to receive clarifications. The way what seems to be the case in the media, this is a manifestly illegal arrangement that actually runs counter to the budget law. You have to admit one fact: when the Knesset approves the budget, Netanyahu will be able to rest on his laurels or wherever he wants to rest in, but he will have a government for longer than a year. At the same time, the talks concerning reaching compromise concerning the judicial reform continue in the president's mansion. You objected to participating in them. What do you think is happening in these talks, and what do you think needs to be done? Should these talks continue and try to find a compromise concerning the structure of the Israeli regime? First of all, there are no talks there. There's an attempt to just diminish the protest. I think that my friends in the opposition, Lapid and Gantz, are there's no room for these talks because it gives legitimacy to an unlegitimate process. I saw Netanyahu in the last week being interviewed abroad, and everywhere he says, look, we have a democracy. The fact is that the opposition is sitting with me discussing the judicial reform. The very togetherness is giving a legitimacy. And the second point is one of the things that undermine the economy is uncertainty, and what we need is certainty. And the whole idea of deferring it by 3 months or 6 months is only to extend this uncertainty further. And the third thing, that he wanted to get to the day of budget relatively quietly, and this whole process of just diluting it in the president's mention allowed him to get to the budget freely. And once that passes, he has another year and a half to maneuver, and the goal is very clear because there is no judicial reform. So there's only an attempt to extricate oneself from a private legal complication. Hence, all the legislation that we saw to this very day, the Dairy 1 law, the Dairy 2 law, the gift laws, everything is personal. And if we do need to understand what needs to be done, look, this is no time to be nice and polite. We must make very dramatic, difficult decisions. And as far as I'm concerned, this government is truly endangering the state of Israel as a Jewish Zionist state. What they want is a Haredi, Messianic state. And in order to prevent this from happening, the opposition has to be very clear not to maneuver. As far as I'm concerned, there are 5 principles which are really ironclad. And even before them, you have to understand, on the 1st of September 2022, 42% of the students in first grade were either Haredi, Bedouin, or Arabs. In 2028, there will be more than 51%. According to various calculations, between 2050 to 2055, most of the population, more than 51% of the population of the State of Israel, will be not a Zionist population. And the fact that we as a Zionist state finance the creation of an anti-Zionist majority is something very serious. As far as I'm concerned, the time has come to make tough decisions. What do you mean? What do you mean tough decisions? There are 5 principles. Separation between church and state, equal burden, a full equality in the burden, no exemptions anymore, not even one. Jews, Muslims, Christians, Druze, Circassians, all of them at the age of 18, either military service or national service. The third principle is core studies in a full, comprehensive curriculum, and any institute who's not willing to teach core studies should not receive 1 dime, not 1 shekel, 1 dime from the state. And in these matters, we have to be very clear. The establishment of the Constitution has to be made, and none of this goes together with sitting in the coalition with Shas and Yadut HaTorah. When my friends in the opposition are not willing to go for what I say, a commitment to a Zionist coalition, a Zionist consensus, when they try to be separate and sort of blinking toward Shas and Yadut HaTorah, winking at them, that it's impossible neither to reach a constitution, to separate between church and state, to reach equality in the burden. These things are so important, and I think that this is the very last minute. You have to come full force with full power and not to, blink, and to constantly, to just be nice to one another and let's dialogue. It's all very nice, but ultimately it leads us to a crash. But when you talk about strength and power, as of tonight, as soon as we have the state budget, what can the protests do? It's over. If we argue that we are playing according to the rules of the democratic game and that obliges all of us, what power then are you talking about? Look, as I said earlier, this entire dialogue is redundant, and I told Gantz and Lapid, learn from the previous chairperson of the opposition, Benjamin Netanyahu. When he was in the opposition, he would not cooperate on any matter. He wouldn't even show up to the Prime Minister's office, not even for security updates, neither from Bennett or Lapid. He refused to support the laws that he himself initiated, like the citizenship law or the Judea and Samaria regulations. The fact that the opposition is collaborating with him, it simply plays into his hands. This is one point. Number two, when it comes to the economic measure, they are leading us to an economic tsunami, to a total collapse. And regretfully, the governor of the Bank of Israel would not suffice with this last raise. The prices will continue to raise because they're simply fueling the inflation. So instead of cutting back, they only increase the non-productive expenditure. Just look where they made those cutbacks. In this era, they cut back in the authority of innovation by $1 million shekels, or all the students, the dormitories, Holocaust survivors didn't get an addition of anything except for what is called automatic pilot, namely linkage to the index. They got no additions. So these things ultimately are leading us to a collision. They closed the import. You were asking how come olive oil from the beginning of the year raised by 34%. How come? It's very simple. When Oded was Minister of Agriculture and I was Minister of Finance, we gave quota of import of olive oil, and the price went down. They actually canceled all those quotas. The prices rise, and they continue to rise, and we will get to the month of July, and that would be an economic tsunami that would flood this entire regime. And I do hope that we'll be able to truly establish something stable, something clear, that without any shame would call a spade and say what things are. We cannot continue. The Haredi public is held captive by cynical business people of Shas and Yadut Torah who exploit them in order to accumulate money and honor. And they simply want to perpetuate poverty and ignorance. This is why they're not willing to have them study core studies. They're not allowing them to acquire a profession. There's no connection between Judaism and what they preach for. All the great spiritual leaders of Israel were fighters, Joshua and David and the Maccabites, and women were fighters. Deborah the prophet was the first minister of defense in the history of the Jewish people, and Yehudit also decapitated the leader of the army of Nebuchadnezzar. And Yael too, she too was a fighter. And by the way, they all worked at the same time. Hillel was actually cutting wood. Maimonides was the doctor. Ashva was the producer of wine. I said, where did you find in our sources that you cannot work, that you cannot fight? It's only a figment of their imagination. Quite honestly, I'd like to bring you back not to another time or period, but rather the current reality. Demography, according to the Israeli regime, determines the structure of the coalition. How can you possibly see a different coalition? And perhaps that is the reason why your colleagues are sort of looking sideways to other politicians. Where will you bring them from? First of all, the first decision, as I said, has to be that everyone serves either in the military or national service. You have to cut back on children's benefits. There's no other way. We cannot continue with these, and we are encouraging all because we are merely encouraging the anti-Zionist demography and, of course, everything else. Separation between church and state. There cannot be a parallel judiciary. They say that they stopped this revolution or coup. Nothing is done of the sort. They increase budgets to the rabbinical court. They expand the powers of the rabbinical court system. They can deal with finance law, not just with marital law. There's so many things here which have a very clear destination, and halacha state. This is what they aim for. They don't hide this, and that would be the end of Zionism. Hence, there is a fierce struggle that goes beyond the near elections. I'd like to ask you two personal questions. Look, here in the audience, you probably have the support and the positive attitude, but it is a fact that in the recurrent elections campaigns, you did not succeed in translating this sympathy and your worldview into mandates. And ultimately, what is taken into account is mandates. Why did it happen to you? Look, politicians always have dilemma. Should they say the right things or the popular things? This is the dilemma. I agree that whatever I say is very not popular, but these are the right things. This is what I believe in, and I'm not willing to change my position. I believe that if you ask the people in the public, most of the people want dialogue and want meetings at the president's mention, and believes that maybe they will reach a compromise. Perhaps it pays off from the electoral point of view, but that would not make me change my opinions. I will say whatever is true in my view, even if it isn't popular, come what may. But I want to be, at least vis-a-vis myself, to be extremely honest. Every morning I shave in front of the mirror, and when I do that, I want to be at peace with myself. This is the most important thing to me. I think that this is the best point to end with, but I would like to ask you one more question. We are after another round vis-a-vis the Palestinians. What would you do different as a person who shapes policy, as a statesman, as a person who headed the defense system with the Palestinians, who will not disappear, as Yitzhak Rabin used to say? He always said that every Israeli has a dream. When he wakes up in the morning, there won't be any Palestinians or Arabs around. But that's merely a dream. What would you do as a decision maker according to this approach? First of all, that merits an entire lecture, but I'll put it this way. Every deed starts with a thought, and we're not thinking enough. I try to lead a measure of thinking. What should we do with the Gaza Strip? What is the end game with Gaza? Gaza will not disappear, so we're dealing with some operation, a topical campaign. We're handling this point or another, but ultimately, once we grow up, what would we like to see Gaza as? Can we do what we want to do? Is it possible to turn Gaza into the Singapore of the Middle East? Everything that is being done now is exactly the opposite to what is logical. I resigned from my position as Minister of Defense mostly because of the controversy around the Gaza Strip. I tried to bring to a comprehensive discussion what is our position, what is the horizon, what is the direction, and I failed. And as far as I'm concerned, whatever Netanyahu does, it only reinforces Hamas. And at the end of the day, Netanyahu is the collaborator of Hamas. He's the accomplice. He decided to inject money to give them immunity. And he's not responding to anything. Even when Hamas calls upon murdering Jews and congratulates the murder of Jews and determining the rules of the game according to which he can carry out terror attacks in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and to keep the quiet there. Even in the recent operation, he sat in the same war room with the jihadists, the Islamic Jihad, and they gave them logistic assistance. But despite it all, they were left unharmed. Hence, when it comes to Palestinians and Judea and Samaria, we have to do a restart. We have to revisit the whole topic. What do we do? to just, move from one day to another and just improvise. That's no strategy, that's no policy, and we have neither strategy nor policy. Whatever guides this government, whatever motivates this government, is merely the personal attempt of Netanyahu to get away from this legal entanglement, and for this end he subjugates the entire activity of the government, all the budgets and the entire legislation. Mr. Lieberman, whenever you were asked, how are you, you used to say, it's heaven. Recently, you answer differently. Nothing good is threatening us. Do not be afraid. Thank you, sir. Thank you for agreeing to talk to us.